Monsieur le Président, distinguished
Mr. President,
for joining us for this second section of this AFIS Africa Financial Industry Summit for 2023. My name is John Everington. I am the Middle East and Africa editor for The Banker magazine, which is part of the Financial Times. One of the great sadnesses of my job is that I am based in London and not here in Africa. It truly is a wonderful joy to be with you in Lomé. It's my first time here. It's been a while since I've been in West Africa, but it's a great joy to be here and to meet so many of you already. My guest today for this fireside chat is Mr. Wale Edun, who really needs no introduction as the Minister of Finance for Nigeria. Please do welcome once again Mr. Edun to the stage. So, Wale, I mean, there's plenty to talk about Nigeria and the amazing changes which are happening in the country as we speak. I think perhaps if we start this conversation, if we go back to the main sort of mission statement of this conference, which is about building a world-class financial industry within Africa. And I mean, this is something that, I mean, yourself as a banker who's worked with Chase, with IBTC, with the World Bank, I mean, you've had a ringside seat for the development of Africa's financial sector, I mean, for many, many years. We have heard quite a lot about the development of it and I mean how it has kind of come on leaps and bounds. I mean with some of the big names in the industry, the UBAs, the Ecobanks, so many others. For it to really sort of take that next step and to become this truly kind of world-class kind of financial industry, what are the sort of big steps and big leaps that need to happen for it really to kind of take off to another level, would you say?
Thank you very much, John. Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, bonjour. Let me just first of all say I'm very happy to be here. This is my very first AFIS. I don't know why they didn't invite me before, but I'm very happy to have been invited now. It's my first, and in the famous words, it will not be my last, by God's grace. You know, when we look at the conversation today, it's all about what Jeune Afrique, and I commend them very much, and the other partners for what they have put together. It is about a pan-African effort. And it's about setting the agenda, and I think the right agenda is one that focuses on the raising of funds in Africa for the development of Africa. It is time that we go domestic, we go continental, we rely on our savings, our pension funds, our investment funds, our mutual funds, and including our diasporas, our various diasporas, to mobilize the funds on which we use to develop our countries. And of course, it's all about institutional building. What has happened so far is that we have had, first of all, we've taken over in many places the domestic ground, the domestic markets. It is the indigenous banks that are leading the way. And now the next steps to go continental means that we have to have the regulatory framework in place, we have to have the payment systems and so on and so forth. But I think we are well on that way, led often by private sector entrepreneurs, and all they need is the right regulatory framework and we can excel.
Indeed, and I mean the AFCFTA is now coming up, I think for its second anniversary kind of very soon. And I mean, this is kind of a project of potential monumental significance for the future of the continent. I mean, where we are now, I mean, how would you assess the progress that's been? I mean, and also it's still very early days, of course, but I mean, what are those real kind of, you talk about the regulatory harmonizations and the comings together, what are the sort of next priorities in the implementation of that?
What I would say is that at the start, you need always, with reform, with change at this level, you need the political will, you need the leadership, you need individuals standing up and pointing the way. And of course, as we've said before, you need the various pillars that will take you there. And a payment system. We heard earlier about the fact that we go through so many other currencies to deal with each other. With technology, with the fintech expertise that we possess in Nigeria, but also across Africa, I think that's one of the ways in which we can really build the basis for a pan-African effort.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, and we'll come back to that sort of fintech aspect down the line. Talking about, I mean, coming back to within Nigeria, it's now coming up for 6 months since the new regime has come in, the new administration rather, and there's been a sort of a very strong start in terms of the immortal 5 words in the inauguration speech: the fuel subsidies are gone, and then the move very quickly after that for the exchange rate, a managed float, the harmonization between the black market and the official rates. 6 months on, how would you assess kind of the progress that has been made, and what are the sort of priorities going forward for the next 6 months?
I think in 6 months, as you said, right from day one, under the leadership of President Tinubu, the country has changed. It has changed direction. It was basically facing a fiscal crisis. It was facing a situation where an unsustainable, unaffordable, and very ill-conceived and ill-implemented fuel subsidy was costing 2% of GDP and basically taking the country down the drain financially. That has been resolved, and the country is now on a path and in a direction to achieve the macroeconomic stability that would now enable investment to flow and the economy to grow. And when I say investment, I'm talking about domestic investors, Nigerians in Nigeria, Nigerians with funds abroad in the diaspora, Nigerians living in Nigeria keeping their funds abroad, as well as, of course, foreign direct investment. The emphasis is on equity rather than debt. We've heard earlier from Jeremy, from Serge, about how costly it is to borrow in international markets at this stage. So the emphasis is on domestic resource mobilization, and it is on attracting equity. Around the world, interest rates are high. They're likely to stay high as the Western world is concerned with the battle against inflation. So what we have to look to is, for instance, 10 trillion in sovereign wealth funding that is out there, as well as private capital in the trillions. And we heard earlier about the green financing that is available. So we are on the path to attract those funds to invest, to increase productivity, grow the economy, create jobs, and reduce poverty in Nigeria. Thank you.
And I mean, there's been widespread recognition of the success and the importance of those early steps. But of course, Nigeria's challenges are, I mean, its potential is great, but the challenges are very deep and very ingrained. And talking with people in Nigeria, there is a little bit of a hesitancy about whether that reform agenda can be sustained. I mean, talk about the subsidies creeping back in, and then you have the widening once again between the exchange rates. Again, I mean, can you sort of say, I mean, how will you sustain that reform agenda, even the reforms that you've already introduced going forward?
Yes, certainly. As I said, when it comes to the kind of macroeconomic reform that is being undertaken in Nigeria is not always a straight line. And there are times where, once having set the direction of travel, there may be times to pause for breath and then go again. But one thing that has come up earlier in the conversation today is the importance of communication, the importance of being able to explain, dimension, and get the message over as to what the intention is, where we are, and where we are going. So clearly, the fuel subsidy removal has led to a cost of living spike. But I think another important aspect of the reform process is the intervention that is being made on behalf of the poor, on behalf of the most vulnerable, to ease the pains of the inevitable process of transition to a better economic platform. It does cost, it does take a time to achieve and see the benefits. And in that time, you cannot, an important part of that communication is to intervene. And that's what's been happening in Nigeria. There's been tremendous intervention to help with food inflation by increasing food supply. There have been wage awards to the workers, and so on and so forth. A whole package of interventions to ease the pain.
Indeed. And I mean, can you say about, I mean, again, we don't have a crystal ball about how long, I mean, the inflation crisis is, or the sort of higher rates for longer era is going to carry on for. But I mean, is this something that you can commit to kind of going forward? I mean, these sustaining payments for the cost of living?
Well, certainly, in terms of achieving macroeconomic stability, one of the important things is to stabilize the exchange rate, is to bring down inflation, and of course, bring down interest rates eventually, so that borrowing for investment is affordable. And clearly, the issue in Nigeria at the moment is one of liquidity, foreign exchange liquidity. And that is being tackled systematically, starting with the obvious place, getting oil production, oil revenues up at a time when clearly prices are high, and it's best to cash in on that process. And that is being done by systematically making efforts to reduce the losses in the oil sector and increase the production, increase the sales, and increase the revenue. And there are also, it's also important to point out that in terms of mobilizing resources, foreign exchange resources, in Nigeria, there are tremendous resources available. Even within the banking sector, there's an estimate of about $30 billion, which people are holding, but they have not been given an incentive to let those dollars go into the formal money supply. They're just keeping it in their bank accounts. They're not in the hands of the government. They're in the private sector hands. But similarly, there's a lot of cash outside the system, and there are a couple of executive orders that have been authorized by Mr. President to bring in the cash that's outside the system. So a lot of the funding that's required is actually available, and we just have to restore confidence of people to hand it over.
Indeed. I mean, it's in the last few weeks that those proclamations came out, and you've talked about, I think you talked at the time that it would be weeks and months for these measures to take force and to show an impact. Have you already started to see an impact of those measures? And I mean, I'm trying to kind of gather, so like kind of when are they likely to kind of have such an impact so that foreign exchange deficit is wiped out?
I would say yes, but I would say there's much more to come. Right now, I think you'll see that the gaps have between the unauthorized market and the formal market has closed. There is no longer the same inefficiencies and anomalies that made people target foreign exchange speculation and foreign exchange arbitrage as a veritable means of livelihood. I think people are going back to value-added occupations. And I think in terms of the foreign exchange market, there is going to be a comprehensive reform of that market to remove the activity that is currently, I would say that for the individual retailer, they are unprotected. They're dealing in a market without rules. So the intention is to have all players inside a formal market where there are rules-based price setting and where the smaller retailer is protected and speculators are left dealing illegally, if they want to, with appropriate sanctions. So that reform is coming to improve the operation of the foreign exchange market.
Indeed. I mean, I mean, journalists, we always like to know when things are going to happen. Can you give any comment as to sort of when we can expect those reforms to come out?
I would like to, but I know the governor of Central Bank is going to be on at some time, and maybe he will give you more. But what I will say is that it's important to point out that Mr. President in Nigeria is a man that believes in rule of law. It's one of his major priorities is to really instill the rule of law in all that is done. And so the Central Bank is autonomous in terms of its interest rate setting, its money supply control and so forth. But it is one economy, and the foreign exchange aspect of it is something that is done with collaboration. So it will be a joint effort by the Central Bank in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance to really deliver a new framework for the foreign exchange market.
Okay. No, I mean, we wait to see details with great anticipation. And I mean, there was an AfriInvest yesterday. There was an AfriInvest event yesterday in Lagos about the sort of launching of their report, and I think there were comments made at that event about other steps that the government can be taking, particularly with regards to a sort of a national asset register, and just being able to kind of just take stock of what is there, and then this can unlock further financing. I mean, can you speak a little bit more to that and sort of what impact that will have?
Yes, I think that clearly one of the options that government has eventually when that decision is taken is monetization of assets. And an important aspect of that is updating your register, knowing exactly what you have got, so that you're in a position to now decide that some assets you'd like to monetize by way of concession, by way of private-public partnership, by way of licensing, and even by way of partial divestment. Before you can do that, you need a rigorous and robust national asset register.
Okay. I'm being given signals. I think I'd just like to ask maybe a couple more questions. I mean, you've spoken very much about the importance of kind of attracting, I mean, sort of the private sector investment, certainly, I mean, from within Nigeria itself, and I mean, within the continent. But I mean, can you talk about some of the other efforts that you're taking, I mean, sort of to attract investment from outside as well, and I mean, and what role that's going to play?
Well, I think Mr. President at one of our trips just a couple of days ago in the Middle East mentioned that he was a chief marketing officer of Nigeria, and that's because his plan and the strategy is to stabilize that the macro economy, the investment environment, and then, of course, attract investment to fuel the growth of the economy. And so the results are very positive. The reception worldwide of his bold, courageous, and extremely timely macroeconomic reforms have provided a platform and a positive environment within which people now can look at having their confidence restored enough to talk about investments, foreign direct investment in the Nigerian economy, which of course, as we know, of the 1.4 or so billion people in Africa, 218 million are in Nigeria. It is the largest market, and that is attractive to people.
Of course. And before the lady with the microphone kind of comes and yanks me off the stage, one more question. again, in AfriInvest said there are structural changes that must happen to provide the fertile ground for seeds to be sown. And I know that sort of there's reform kind of being planned, I mean, in terms with taxes and fiscal consolidation and such. I know that this has been underway and is a sort of is a very important project. I mean, can you tell us about sort of the progress of those just as we finish?
Certainly, there is a fiscal policy and tax reform committee that is already at work since last August, and they have started rolling out measures because there is a root and branch reform of the fiscal policy environment and the tax system, so that tax to GDP is currently around less than 10%, and the plan is within 2 years to get it up to 18%. And similarly, government revenue as a percentage of GDP is also relatively low, and the plan is to get that up to about 20% or so of GDP by 2027, so that there are steps being taken to reform taxes, and on the other hand, to manage expenditure better, because it's, you know, when people see that their funds are being wasted, you lose the public trust. And so there are some fiscal incentives which are costing 1% of GDP, tax exemptions, import waivers, so all that is being rationalized. And I think that's what they were referring to yesterday, the fact that the fiscal space, both on the revenue side and the expenditure side, is being reformed in a very robust manner that will lay the basis for growing the economy through investment, particularly private investment.
Indeed. I mean, it's early days, but we look forward to tracking the progress going forward. Mr. Edun, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your contributions.
Thank you.